right. So we're going to move on to our next distinguished speaker. We're going to be, it's my pleasure to introduce Tuhina Das. Hopefully I'm not butchering the pronunciation of your name. And she is she works for Airbnb. And, Airbnb is one of the, really sort of disruptive companies of the last decade or so. And she's going to do a little bit of a workshop on building your personal brand. So Tuhina, if you could give us a brief introduction before you get started, I'd appreciate that very much.
Awesome. Thank you, Tom. And thank you, Jenna, so much for your context. I feel like I've learned a lot in the past 20 minutes as well. Hi, everyone. I'm Tuhina, as Tom mentioned. I'm a university recruiter at Airbnb. And I'm super excited to be involved with Mesa. And I've been with Airbnb for 2 years now, but I've been in the university recruiting space my whole career. So it's really exciting for me to meet more students and get to know you and get to know what your motivations are. And I think through this session, hopefully you'll be able to uncover some of that for yourself and start to take away some sort of thoughts and insights and reflections on who you are and what your brand is. And we'll talk about this along a couple different dimensions. But before I get started, a couple ground rules here. Please engage in the chat. It would be awesome. There are certain areas where I might ask you to do a little activity, but I'd also just love to see your thoughts if you're willing to share with your peers and all of us on some of this content. And hopefully that way we can learn together. So yeah, let's get started. Love to move on to our agenda if possible. Awesome. So we're going to talk about a couple different things in the next 30-ish minutes. The first is really, what is a personal brand, right? I think it's really important to start to get a sense of who you are, both professionally and personally, and how to align those two things to help you grow in your career, right? The end goal is for you to have a really successful career journey that you have influenced through your personal experiences, right? You want everything to be aligned, and you want to make sure that you're reflecting a brand that you're proud of and that reflects your successes. Secondly, we're going to talk specifically about LinkedIn, because I think it's a really interesting platform and the ways recruiters use it are pretty specific. So I'd love to give you some tips on how to brush up your LinkedIn profile. And I'll mention some other tools to keep in mind as well, including Jumpstart, which is exciting. Third, I want to talk a little bit about the resume. I think the resume is such an interesting signal of our brand, right? Oftentimes in a job search, it feels like the most important document, but I want to sort of demystify the resume a little bit and talk about things you can do to set yourself up for success. Next, we're going to talk about telling your story. What does it mean to build a narrative around who you are and share that with other people professionally? A couple other tricks and tips at the end. And then if we have time, just a quick snapshot of what Airbnb has been up to. As you all know, it's been a really interesting year for all of us, including a company like Airbnb in the travel industry. So I'd love to share some transparent news about how we've been evolving and moving forward. And then we'll talk a little bit about student opportunities, and I'll leave the room open for Q&A. So it's a lot, but promise we'll get through it together. Cool. So let's just start off talking about your brand, right? Who are you as a student and professional? We can check out the next slide. So this is sort of an old reference of a movie. I don't know if anyone here has watched Zoolander, but I want to remove some of the existentialism of your brand and you having to ask this like very nebulous philosophical question of who you are. And let's pare it down to the specifics so you can really start to crystallize that and build a really kind of impactful brand around it. So I wanted to first start off with a definition, right? What is a personal brand? A personal brand to me is a way of establishing and then constantly reinforcing who you are and what you stand for in your career and your life. And you hear the word personal, but truly your personal brand should reflect you and your professional brand, because who you are and what you do should be integrated, or at the very least aligned, right? Your values in life probably extend into the values that you bring into the workplace. The second thing to note about your personal brand is that it's evolving, right? Don't feel like you need to establish it today and it can never change again, right? This is dynamic. And as you bring in more internships, more life experience, more personal experience into your repertoire, you can add and change and evolve your brand as you feel relevant, right? And let me give you a quick example of my own brand. I don't know if anyone who's on the line has had a chance to look at the speaker bios for today, but my presenter bio is an example of my brand, right? It shows a little bit about what I'm excited about in the context of my work, and also a bit about who I am. And so if you guys haven't had a chance to look at it, go back and check it out. If there's anyone here who has similar interests, would love to connect with you in communities, would love to learn about all of your interests, right? It's a great place to start. Cool, would love to move on to the next slide. Awesome. This is just another opportunity to think about, you know, what's great about you, right? In this case, Andy Dwyer is really confident that he's a nice person. And that's a part of your brand, right? If you're able to confidently say that and represent yourself in this way, that's really great. So on the next slide, we're going to have some tips around how to start thinking about your brand, right? There are a couple of key pieces. So one, this is an opportunity for you to be introspective, right? You should reflect on your strengths and your core skill sets that you're developing or that you want to develop to achieve your goals, right? And I think the first kind of very foundational way to do that is make a list, right? Make a list of the things that make you stand out, the things that you are developing in terms of your skills and your toolbox of things that you want to work on. And that list will start to help you crystallize what are the highlights within that that define your brand. Fourth, define your audiences, right? Once you have an idea of who you are and the things that you stand for, try to define the different audiences that might need to interact with your brand, right? A recruiter might need to hear about your brand in a different way than a hiring manager or an interviewer or your peers, right? So it's really important to start thinking about the audiences that you will expose your brand to and how you do that. Next, I think this is something I recommend to folks in interviews, to a lot of different aspects of your job search and your career journey. But I think it's really important to find 2 to 3 crystallized examples of who you are, the experiences that you've had that showcase your skill sets, and build a narrative around that, right? Instead of trying to look at your entire breadth and body of work and trying to distill all of that down into a brand or, you know, an answer to tell me about yourself, pick a couple things that really showcase different aspects of your brand so that you always have that in your back pocket and you can refer to those examples when you're in a setting where you're talking to someone about your brand or talking to someone about your accomplishments. Next, I want you to work on your career fair pitch. We're going to talk about that a little bit later. We're going to talk a little bit more about embracing networking and events. And then lastly, one thing that I think is super important is being consistent. It's really important that if you're representing your brand somewhere, you want to make sure that it's consistent across channels, it's consistent across conversations you have, so that there are no mixed messages, right? So that everyone that you're speaking to and sharing your brand with gets a really good sense of who you are and what you stand for. So on the next slide, we're actually going to do a little activity around making this list. So here are some questions and areas of reflection that I pulled that I think are really good foundations to start thinking about your brand. So what I'd love is if you all on the line have like a pen and paper on hand, or if you're using like notes or Quip or something on your laptop, if you could take maybe 3 to 5 minutes to pick maybe 2 to 3 of these questions or a section that you're really interested in and just brain dump some of the answers to these questions. And I think that'll start to help you uncover who you are, what you're motivated by, what your brand potentially could be. So would love to maybe have Danielle or Tom start the clock, give you 3 to 5 minutes. Another thing I'd love is if anyone's willing to share answers in the chat or the Q&A, please let me know. I'd love to see kind of how you're thinking about these opportunities. Oh, also, it looks like the questions are repeated on 2 of these slides. That's a mistake, but you know, just there's lots of them. Pick 2 or 3, make it work. And we'll come back in maybe at 1:40, if that sounds good to the group. Cool. All right, I'm counting down. Awesome. Thanks everyone for taking a stab at putting together some reflections on who you are, what motivates you. I saw some really great responses in the chat around being really ambitious towards your goals and working hard, being able to spend hours on creative projects and being really energized by those things. Does anyone else have anything they want to share? Maybe a value that you really look towards as your North Star, or anything else? Cool. All right, so let's move on. I encourage all of you to continue sort of noodling on these things as you evolve your brand. But one thing to think about is after you have all of this on paper and you've kind of thought through these questions and been able to uncover these things about yourself, you can start to build sort of a personal value proposition statement, right? This sort of kind of crystallizes the key things and the key traits that you want to exhibit in the rest of your brand. And that value proposition can sort of build a clear picture of who you are as a person, as an employee, as a colleague across all of your channels, right? And so I, again, can continue to emphasize that you should be reflecting on these things as you move through your college journey, right? Today, your brand might be something. Today, you're motivated by something, and 2 years down the road, it might be something else. So these kinds of things are really important to check in on for yourself and really help you grow. So let's now talk about LinkedIn. Happy to go on to the next slide about tips. But one thing I find that many students do these days is that they actually bypass LinkedIn completely, or they deprioritize it in favor of putting their profiles on other platforms. I think it's really important to be present on other platforms, Jumpstart included. But LinkedIn, I think, is a pretty crucial tool for getting your information in front of recruiters. Not because we're always looking to it as a source of truth, but a lot of the times we use it to confirm or corroborate information we see elsewhere, or use it as a way to access your profile to be able to reach out to you if we don't easily have your contact information. And so I think it's really important to take these tips and sort of start to bolster your LinkedIn presence, even if you're early on in your career journey. So a couple of things that I suggest, if you're comfortable using a photo of some sort, is really nice. So that shows that your profile is legitimate. Again, that's like a comfort level thing, but a lot of times there are profiles that pop up that are scams. So it's really important to look legitimate and show an employer that you're professional and that you have sort of your profile filled out, starting with your photo. Secondly, I think it is really important to complete the main profile sections, right? If you go on LinkedIn, you'll see a summary area, an area to put your work experience, potentially education. I think to the extent that's possible, it's really great to complete those so that you give as clear of a picture of your highlights to recruiters and hiring managers and interviewers as you can. Third, focus on key skills. So recruiters and others will actually often search the keywords that are related to the roles they're trying to fill, right? If a recruiter is looking for a software engineering intern, they're going to look for specific things in your headline or summary or job description or work experience descriptions that say that you've worked on specific languages, that say that you've worked in a specific tech stack, right? And these types of things are really nice to highlight on your profile so that you are easily exposed to the right recruiters when you're looking for opportunities. Fourth, this is really important. I think it's really important to map your experience on LinkedIn directly to what's on your resume, right? Again, we talked about your brand being consistent across channels. So your LinkedIn is an opportunity for, again, you to pick out the highlights of your resume and signal it to folks that might be coming across your profile to really showcase your accomplishments. The second thing I will say on that, though, is please be concise. I often see LinkedIn profiles that are copy pastes of people's resumes. Your LinkedIn doesn't need to be your full body of work, but I think the highlights are really important to reflect so that for recruiters going on there to corroborate what they see on your resume, they have the information they need right at the tip of their fingers. Next, I think it's really important to quantify your accomplishments to the extent possible, right? Saying that you're, for example, results oriented isn't not nearly as effective as kind of presenting your actual results, right? And that's something we're going to talk about on the resume as well. But whether it's, a number of articles you've written or deals you've closed or internships you've had, like that's really great to see. And then next, ask for endorsements. So LinkedIn's really cool in that you can put down your skills and have other people share that they endorse you for that skill. They think you're good at it. They've worked with you in a context in which they've seen you excel in that skill. So ask people to do that for you. Ask people to write you recommendations. This is a really nice way for recruiters and others to bubble up your key skill sets and match those to the role that they're recruiting for. So let's say you're really good at Python, or you've worked extensively in Ruby on Rails. Make sure that you put that on your LinkedIn profile and have folks that have worked with you that can vouch for you endorse you so that we can see those as highlights. And then lastly, I think, again, this is an area around comfort, but if you're engaging with the platform, it's really cool to be able to comment for reach. So if there are folks that you admire that are posting on LinkedIn, I think it's really awesome to engage with their content so that you are visible in those areas and not just on your profile. So that's something to think about if you're excited about engaging with all of the different articles and posts on LinkedIn. I encourage you to do it without hesitation. Awesome. So a couple other platforms, obviously, I wanted to mention. There's so many places, as we were talking about earlier, that you can be present online as a student. But my main takeaway is, depending on your goals, right? If you're in a job search, or if you're looking for a particular opportunity, let's say you're looking for an internship, or you're starting a co-op search, it's really important to be present, right? My main takeaway is add your resume and your contact information in the areas that it's possible to do so, and engage to the extent that you can, right? These are places where recruiters are constantly digging for information. So for example, if your resume is not attached to your profile, we're getting an incomplete picture of who you are. Or if your email is not readily available, maybe there's an incredible opportunity for you and your background matches very well, but the recruiter has no way to find you, right? In that case, go back to our earlier point, really great to have a really nice LinkedIn profile so the recruiter can message you there. So it's really important to be consistent and find the opportunities in which you can engage with these platforms to the extent that you are able. Cool. All right, let's move on to the resume piece of your brand. So resumes can be daunting. I would say that as a recruiter in my career, I still struggle with sitting down and fluffing up my resume, editing it when I have new accomplishments. But I think it is such a key tool, right? And such a key signal to folks as to who you are and what you've done and what your brand is, that this is a really important thing to continue thinking about as you move along in your journey. So, there are certain things that I recommend for your resume. You can say things like you crushed it, you did a really cool job at your last internship. But I think what we're going to talk about more in our next slide is specificity, right? Let's get more specific than I crushed it, even though you probably did, right? Let's talk about how you did that. Cool. So let's talk about focusing on impact when you are putting together your resume, right? And I want to caveat this slide by saying, if you're early on in your career, if you're a freshman, if you're a sophomore, don't feel like you need to have the perfect resume that's filled out end to end right now, right? And resume, along with your brand, is a dynamic, evolving document that grows as you grow with your experience, right? So don't worry. These are just some tips to sort of ground you, but there's always room for improvement, right? Couple things to start off with: logistics. I personally believe that if you are not a PhD, or if you don't have 10 plus years of experience, your resume really should be one page. For context for students, right? It really depends on the company you're applying for, but a lot of the times, if you're interested in companies with a relatively steady volume of applications, recruiters have maybe 20 seconds to look at your resume. That's not a lot of time, right? You've spent tons of hours putting together this list of accomplishments, but on our end, we have 25 seconds to evaluate your potential for a role. So keep it short, keep it tight, keep it concise, and crystallize what you want to say. Secondly, this is interesting. This is an interesting point. So I think that function for a resume is a lot more important than form. Caveat: if you're in design, if you're a UI UX designer, if you're a product designer, if you're trying to map your resume to what your portfolio style is, do that. But I think at the end of the day, I would put fancy graphics and colors in the background and really push forward the things that you've done and really highlight the evidence around your brand and the work that you've accomplished. So how do you do that? My foundational framework as a recruiter, the thing that I look for in resumes is not just I did X, right? A lot of times on a resume, I'll see things like, here's the 5 things that I did at my job. But instead of that, what's frequently missing is the result of your responsibilities, right? Not only what you delivered, but how did you deliver impact through that work? What were the changes made? What were the processes updated? What were the statistics achieved, right? That's really important to share because that shows that you actually did work that had influence and didn't just do work to do work, right? So the foundation I encourage you all to think about your resume in is I did X, which resulted in Y outcome or impact, right? That second piece is really crucial, and that is the evidence that we want to see. So I also want to say that not every accomplishment that you made will necessarily fit this mold, right? But the more often that you can, the better, right? Let's say 75% of your resume is based on this impact model, and the other 25% was truly you just completing these large scale tasks that needed to be done. You can reflect that as well, but the more you quantify your accomplishments by impact, use data-driven evidence, use qualitative markers of results, right? I made this process different and it resulted in a change so that 10 more folks could get onboarded onto the team within 3 months. These are the kinds of things that are really important to reflect. Next, I think it's really important to put your skills and technologies at the bottom of your resume. I think readability of a resume is actually really crucial, right? Again, when we go back to 30 seconds to a minute to look at your stuff, recruiters need to be able to quickly point out the things that they need to see. So I suggest, starting with your education up top, starting with, and then putting classwork next. It's very important for us to see what classwork you've taken so we can see where you are in your sort of major and your journey throughout the concepts that you're learning. So we know if you're ready or qualified for a specific role. And then at the bottom, I think leadership, volunteer experience, and skills and technologies can go in that order. The other thing that I personally suggest, there is no need for a summary section on your resume, right? A lot of times I see people waste maybe an inch or two of margin on a 3-sentence summary saying that they're results oriented and can solve problems and are looking for XYZ job. All of that should be apparent in your bullet points around your accomplishments, right? When I read your accomplishments and scan the evidence around what you've done and how successful you've been, that should tell me who you are. That should tell me you can problem solve. That should tell me that you're results oriented and can work with others, right? So don't feel like you need to waste time on a summary or a bio section on your resume. You can drop that on LinkedIn. Awesome. And then, as I mentioned, classwork is key. Drop that at the top of your resume. And then leadership and volunteer experience is super important to reflect, right? For recruiters, oftentimes what's really exciting is not just how you apply your major or your field of interest in school and at your internships, but how you show a passion or interest in that area outside of those channels, right? Are you maybe participating in hackathons, right? Are you taking leadership in student orgs? Are you doing self-started projects or building an app? Are you collaborating with folks? Or do you have GitHub projects? All of these things are things that I think are great to reflect on your resume because that helps you stand out from the crowd. And then lastly, as kind of a way to tie all of this together, right? This is a lot, I know it could be overwhelming. My suggestion for building your resume is this. Don't start by trying to fit this mold, right? A lot of times it's really hard to sit down and say, okay, how do I take all of my accomplishments and quantify them and put them into this impact framework and then make sure it fits into one page? It's difficult for me. So what I suggest is actually brain dump everything for each of your work experiences. Write down bullets, write down paragraphs, write down everything you've done, write down all the different impact you've made, right? And then once you have all the options, your menu of accomplishments and evidence on the table, you can start to go back and edit, pick out highlights, scrub until you get to that one-page crystallized resume. And then the other thing I suggest is as your resume evolves with your brand, keep old versions. You might need to reference things, and it's also a really great way to track sort of the timeline of your brand and accomplishments, right? So for example, I still have my resume from when I was graduating college from 3 years back. And what that does is if I am looking at a role in the future and there's a specific qualification that was on one of my previous resumes that I had something to do with, I can pull that back instead of having to remember, oh, in 2014, which at this point is a long time ago, what was I doing? A resume is a really clear way to keep track of your accomplishments. So save old versions, many years down the road, it'll be a really great way to see how you've evolved in your brand and in your career. Awesome. Oh, we have a question. Let's, I'll take those at the end, but let me just take a quick look. Awesome. I will get to you soon, Noah. Let's talk about telling your story. And I think the most effective way on the next slide to tell your story is to network, right? To get yourself in front of people so that you can expose your brand to them and tell your story. So how do we do that? A couple of tips that I have are around building your pitch, right? The first is tackling this question of, tell me about yourself, which is a tried and true question in many interview processes. These days, that question might sound a little different, but at the end of the day, the things people are asking you, or the thing that's at the core of the question is, who are you? What is your brand in a concise way? So what are people hoping to hear, right? Again, this comes back to picking out those 2 to 3 highlights from school, from your work, or your personal life that you can point to as your sort of shining star accomplishments, and that you can share in this moment when someone says, tell me about yourself. Keep it concise and high level, right? A lot of times when I ask this question, or when I'm asked this question, there is even a tendency even for me to start, getting really in the weeds of the last thing I did at my last job because I'm super excited about it. And then you're going on a tangent and not able to share a kind of the wider picture of who you are. So an example, I would say, off the top of my head, right? If someone asked me, tell me about yourself, I could say, hey, I'm Tuhina. I've been a university recruiter at Airbnb for 2 years. At Airbnb, I've really been invested in developing programs like technical boot camps that really help up-level students' knowledge of the tech stack so that they can be successful in Airbnb and the industry. At my past job, I was focused on operations and systems for helping retain and hire some really incredible people into the company. And throughout all of these experiences, my priority has been candidate experience and providing really great opportunities for students to learn and grow, both through programs, campus engagement, and other opportunities to engage, right? Something like that. Obviously, that was off the top of my head. You know how it would have been better is if I rehearsed. So my next point is phone a friend, right? Find someone, find a peer, find a mentor, find someone that you can share your pitch with and build that feedback loop, right? Try to pretend like you're in a role play situation, that you're in an interview or you're at a career fair, and try to go through your pitch. Give yourself 2 to 3 minutes on the clock, see how it goes. Then that person can give you feedback. Then you can switch, right? These are the kinds of things that I think are really important. And of course, my pitch just now is pretty short for the sake of time, but I think giving yourself maybe 2 minutes, 3 minutes to tell that story is more than enough. And lastly, put your pitch to practice, right? It's all well and good if you've spent countless hours developing the perfect 2-minute spiel about yourself, but if you're not able to practice it, then you don't know what you can evolve, right? You don't know how people are responding to your brand. You're not getting any sort of real life feedback. So go to career fairs, in this new world that we have, go to virtual events. The fact that you're even here today is huge, right? You are taking the time to start learning about these things so that the next time you appear in front of a recruiter or hiring manager, you have more tools in your arsenal. So definitely practice, practice, practice. And don't be afraid to slip up. Don't be afraid to, again, evolve the way you talk about your brand, evolve your pitch as you start to see what's working for specific audiences, right? So definitely keep that in mind. All right, some final tips and tricks are on the next slide. This is just a way to round out some of the stuff we talked about and a couple other things. How to stand out in a crowd, right? The first thing is just around cover letters. So this is a moment for a real talk from me. You're going to have to write cover letters in your career at some point, but my tried and true opinion is write them only if it's required. So if there's an application you're filling out and there's an asterisk on the cover letter, meaning you can't continue unless the cover letter is filled out, of course, write the cover letter. You have to. But if it's optional, and if you're not interviewing for a startup that has a very, very niche role or some other company where you're really just trying to get your skill set to fit exactly into the role they're looking for, don't need to write a cover letter, right? Again, volume is key. Recruiters don't have as much time. We need to see a really great resume, and I'd rather you spend your time and energy building that incredible resume over writing cover letters. But if you feel compelled to write a cover letter, if you feel compelled to have a template on hand, which I think is always great for anything, keep it short and sweet, right? Cover letters to me are max 2 paragraphs that again highlights your key accomplishments. Don't need a page, don't need a page and a half. The shorter, the better. Awesome. Second, create a GitHub profile. If you're in a technical opportunity or a technical field, that's a great way to signal to interviewers and other technical folks what you've worked on, right? An interviewer can jump into your GitHub profile 30 minutes before you're chatting, and it's a great way for them to understand who you are and what work that you've done, and that can start to contextualize for them sort of your skill set and how much of a fit you would be for that company, which is awesome. Third, we talked about consistency. Again, keep your accomplishments consistent across platforms. But second to that is audit your online presence, right? In this day and age, again, it's easy to find ourselves on a variety of platforms. It's easy to forget what platforms we're on, or it's easy to forget that people have access to places where we are interacting, right? So if you have a Twitter and you don't want recruiters to see it, or you do, make sure that it's audited, right? Make sure it's public if you're posting a lot about your skills or retweeting TechCrunch. And if you want to show that you're engaging in that way, you can do that. But make sure that you know where you exist online, and you can sort of toggle the controls on who you want to have access to that information and who you don't. Next, cold reach outs. Okay, so this is really important to me as a recruiter, so I'd love to share a little bit more with you all. I oftentimes, obviously, get hundreds and hundreds of emails from students on LinkedIn, or actually through my Airbnb email to folks that I might not have given them my email. So I appreciate the hustle. So a lot of folks find me through various channels or assume what my email is. Super cool. If you're going to email a recruiter, which I absolutely think you should do, right? First of all, yes, get in touch with recruiters, be proactive. Don't take no for an answer, or just try if you find someone that you think you want to talk to or that could give you access to opportunities, right? But if you're doing that, be strategic and be personal, right? That's our goal as recruiters, is to give you a personal experience. So if you're trying to get in touch with someone at a company that you're excited about, first is be strategic, right? Instead of spraying to play, instead of emailing every recruiter under the sun, it's really important to go back to your brand, right? Go back to your brand and say, okay, my brand tells me that these 10 companies are showing me that they can meet the needs that I have, and that their mission aligns with my brand. So I'm going to reach out to these 10 companies. And when you do reach out, make it personal, right? It's really easy to BCC 500 recruiters on an email that just says, hey, I'm Tuhina, please hire me. But the more you can sort of funnel that pipeline of your interest and say, hey, Tuhina, I actually saw you were a recruiter at Airbnb, and before that you worked at Dropbox. I'm really curious to hear about your experience, and I'm also interested in this internship role that you have open. Let me know if you can check out my application. That sits a lot better with recruiters, and that makes us more inspired to help out, right? Especially when the volume of folks that reach out is so high. So that's a big tip I have for you. Next, make a list of people you admire. I think the beauty of the internet, the beauty of this access we have as a world now, is that everyone is accessible in the way that they interact with content, with the world. So if there are certain folks in the industry that you admire, whether it's an engineer, whether it's a designer, whether it's a leader, whether it's a CEO, whether it's someone in nonprofit, find where they kind of have curated their brand online, right? And watch them and listen to them for notes. Look at who they're interacting with, see what they're posting, see which articles they're retweeting, kind of absorb the information that they're putting out there, and use that to help you build your brand, help you build your kind of repertoire of tools, help you build your knowledge, right? That's a really important way that we can grow, is by looking at our peers, our mentors, and our leaders in the community. And lastly, I think it's super important to believe in yourself, right? I think, especially in this world where I super feel for all of you students, because things have just been turned upside down. But at the end of the day, I think when you develop your brand, it's an opportunity to say, here is who I am, and this is valuable, right? And you can add value. There's so many places in this world and companies that you're going to add value. So believe in your brand, believe in yourself, use that as a signal and a driving force for your career, and be able to share that you've done all these incredible things, and this is why you'd be a good fit for roles. So sometimes easier said than done. I think we're all on our personal journeys regarding that, but know that you have skill sets to offer, that you have interests in certain areas that you can share with others. And that's, something you can carry with you throughout your experience. Cool.